Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we are doing a deep dive into a life that, well, it really embodies this idea that true catalysis isn't just about chemistry, it's also about courage.
Hmm.
We're exploring the journey of Johannes Nicholas Brønsted.
And our guide for this dive is a really insightful source. It's titled Brønsted's Catalyst, A Life of Scientific and Moral Courage.
Right.
So that title alone tells you, this isn't going to be just a dry scientific biography.
Exactly. Our mission here isn't just to list his achievements, important as they are. We want to get at the core insights from the source material, really understand the forces that shaped Brønsted.
The science, of course.
The science, yes, but also critically, the huge personal and moral challenges he had to navigate. We want to present his story in a way that hopefully really resonates with you, showing why his life is such a powerful example.
Yeah. And the source starts by really pulling you into the world he was born into. We're talking the close of the 19th century. Picture Denmark back then. It's a place in transition. Science is moving fast, but life itself could still be incredibly fragile.
Right, sort of candlelit labs alongside these new ideas brewing.
Exactly. Candlelit labs, debates happening in these old historic buildings, and Europe itself is kind of unknowingly on the edge of massive change.
Yeah.
Upheaval, really.
And right in the middle of that setting, young Johannes faced just profound personal tragedy almost right away.
Hmm.
The source describes how his mother died shortly after he was born, and then, just over a decade later, when he was only 14, his father passed away too.
It's almost unimaginable, isn't it? That double blow, so young.
Yeah.
And the source really pauses on this. It asks us to think about the sheer weight of that kind of loss early on.
Mm-hmm.
It poses the question, maybe implicitly, about resilience. Like, how many people facing that level of heartbreak so young might have just been overwhelmed?
Completely.
Would they have found the strength inside them to even think about moving forward, let alone tackling, really demanding intellectual path?
It's such a powerful starting point, because this isn't some story of inevitable genius just cruising through life. It's clearly a story forged in hardship.
Definitely.
But the source points out a really critical turning point, and it came about because of the resilience of someone else's stepmother.
Okay.
Instead of, succumbing to grief or letting circumstances just dictate their future, she made a really brave decision.
Which was?
She moved the family to Copenhagen.
Right. And that wasn't just changing houses.
No, not at all. It was a strategic move, wasn't it?
Yeah.
To a city that was hub culture, education, science.
A nexus of possibilities.
Exactly. And crucially, she enrolled Johannes in a genuinely fine school there.
So you can just imagine him then arriving in this bustling city, Copenhagen, navigating those streets.
Yeah.
The source paints this picture of a young man, maybe still carrying, the weight of those losses, but his eyes are wide open, just soaking in the possibilities.
His mind, already sharp, starting to grapple with big ideas. Maybe even then, sensing some kind of underlying order, the laws governing the natural world.
And this is where that catalyst idea in the title starts to take on a kind of double meaning, isn't it?
How so?
Well, his stepmother's action was a catalyst for his opportunity. But his response to all that adversity, that was a catalyst for his own development.
Ah, I see. Yeah.
And the source really makes you think about the alternative.
Yeah.
What if he had surrendered to that early sorrow? What potential, what discoveries down the line, what acts of courage later in life would have just been lost?
Gone forever.
The stakes, even though nobody knew it then, were incredibly high.
Moving forward in his story, the path he took initially might actually surprise you a bit, and the source points this out too.
Right.
He didn't jump straight into theoretical chemistry. His first university degree, which he got in 1899, was actually in engineering.
Huh. That feels a bit counterintuitive, doesn't it? For someone we now think of as like a foundational figure in chemical theory. But the source suggests this practical background probably gave him a pretty unique perspective. Maybe a grounding in real-world problems that would later inform his more abstract thinking.
Makes sense. And it wasn't long before chemistry really called to him more strongly. He went back to the University of Copenhagen, got his doctorate in 1908. And it was during these years, the source notes, that he met Charlotte Louise Warburg.
Ah, yes, Charlotte Warburg.
Mhm.
The source highlights her as, well, a pretty remarkable individual herself, one of Denmark's very first female engineers.
Wow, okay.
So their connection, which led to marriage, was clearly built on this shared intellectual passion, a mutual respect for rigorous thinking, for inquiry.
Yeah.
The source portrays their partnership as a genuine intellectual and personal bond, a real meeting of minds.
But as we know, groundbreaking discovery rarely just falls into your lap. It usually involves struggle.
Oh,
And the source captures this beautifully. It basically asks, what's genius without struggle? As Brønsted started digging deeper into the really complex world of how chemical reactions work, specifically looking through the lens of thermodynamics.
and maybe we should just clarify thermodynamics for a sec.
Good idea.
It's essentially the physics of energy, right? How
Mm.
energy moves,
Yeah.
how it changes form, and in chemistry, how that dictates whether reactions will happen and sort of how they behave.
Exactly. So as he's grappling with these fundamental energy principles behind chemical change, he started hitting significant roadblocks.
Okay.
The existing scientific framework, the theories and definitions everyone accepted at the time, they just weren't cutting it. They couldn't explain his observations adequately.
The source particularly focuses on the definitions of acids and bases that were dominant then. It uses this analogy like the existing understanding was a map, but with huge crucial areas just left blank. The definitions from chemists like Arrhenius were useful, sure, but limited. They worked okay in water, but kind of fell apart when you looked at reactions in other solvents or with different kinds of molecules.
It's that classic scientific dilemma, isn't it? You see something the established rules just can't explain. Your data doesn't fit the map.
Yeah.
And then you're faced with a choice. Do you dismiss your data, say it's an anomaly, or do you challenge the map itself?
And according to the source, Brønsted absolutely embodied that spirit of challenging the map. He wasn't content to just, work within the known lines or ignore the inconsistencies.
He saw those blank spots.
He saw the missing continents, exactly, and felt compelled to find a way to actually chart them.
This is where his scientific courage, which the source really highlights, comes right to the forefront.
Yeah.
He dedicated himself to finding a more fundamental definition, something that could unify the understanding of acids and bases across all these different chemical environments.
And that persistence, well, it paid off spectacularly. In 1923, Brønsted published his revolutionary new theory. What's fascinating, though, as this source points out, is that an English chemist, Thomas Martin Lowry, arrived at essentially the same conclusion independently, almost at the exact same time.
Wow, really?
Yeah, it kind of speaks to the idea that the scientific world was sort of ready for this shift, maybe, even if not everyone jumped on board immediately.
So what was his definition, the one that became so fundamental?
It was beautifully simple. Elegant, really.
Yeah.
Acids are substances that donate protons, and bases are substances that accept protons.
Now, to us, that sounds almost basic because, well, it's taught in high school chemistry.
Right.
But the source emphasizes that at the time, this wasn't just some minor adjustment.
No, it was a profound shift in perspective. By focusing on the transfer of this fundamental particle, the proton, it just leapfrogged over the limitations of only thinking about water-based reactions.
Oh, okay.
It provided a framework that could explain acid-base behavior in a huge range of chemical systems. Suddenly, reactions that seemed baffling before, or maybe unrelated, were brought together under one clear, logical umbrella.
But as often happens with truly revolutionary ideas, the initial reception wasn't exactly universal applause.
Not always, no. The source describes the skepticism Brønsted faced from some corners of the scientific establishment. Minds that were really steeped in the older definitions were hesitant to let them go.
Yeah, I can imagine. You present something you know is fundamentally right, something that clarifies so much, only to have respected colleagues push back, question it, or maybe just fail to grasp how deep the insight goes.
Exactly. And the source implicitly asks, what does it take to stand firm in that kind of moment?
And Brønsted's response, as the source details it, was typical of his tenacity. He didn't back down, he didn't doubt himself, he engaged, he published extensively, he lectured passionately, and he defended his theory with rigorous logic and all the empirical evidence he had. His conviction in the power of this new definition was just unwavering.
And, well, history proved him right. The explanatory power, the elegance of the Brønsted-Lowry theory, it gradually won out.
Became indispensable.
Absolutely. It gave chemists an indispensable tool, and it quickly became, and still is today, a cornerstone concept taught everywhere. From drug development to environmental analysis, Its impact is just everywhere.
But the source makes it really clear that Brønsted's story doesn't just end in the lab or the lecture hall. His life demanded a whole different kind of courage in its later years.
Right. As Europe descended into the darkness of World War II and Denmark itself was occupied, Brønsted faced a moral challenge on an immense scale.
The source highlights his principled stance against the Nazi regime. And this wasn't just quiet disagreement, it was active, outspoken opposition.
He used his position, his reputation.
Exactly, to speak out against the injustice he was witnessing. And that required a different kind of courage, didn't it? Perhaps even more demanding than challenging scientific dogma.
Arguably, yes. And he didn't stop there. After the war, he felt this duty to help rebuild his country. The source tells us he actually entered politics. He was elected to the Danish parliament in 1947.
Driven by this deep commitment to public service.
Tragically, though, as the source notes, he passed away very shortly after his election, before he could even take his seat and fully contribute in that new role.
Oh, wow.
But his willingness to even step into that political arena, especially given the recent history of occupation and all the challenges Denmark was facing, it just underscores the sheer breadth of his commitment to both intellectual and civic integrity.
His decision to actively oppose the Nazis and then later to enter politics, according to the source, wasn't somehow separate from his scientific life. It was really an extension of the same core values.
Yeah, that makes sense.
A relentless search for truth, a refusal to accept flawed systems, whether they were scientific systems or social ones, and the courage to actually act on his convictions.
The source really argues that his life serves as this powerful testament that true significance isn't just measured by, professional awards or intellectual breakthroughs.
Right.
It's equally, maybe even more profoundly, measured by the moral fortitude you show when you're faced with injustice or really difficult choices.
His legacy is just vast. It touches every chemistry student who learns about proton transfer. It influences countless scientific projects. The source uses this really evocative image. His life is like a stone cast into a pond, sending out ripples of influence far beyond what he could have ever seen directly impacting generations of scientists and thinkers.
But the most compelling insight the source leaves us with isn't just about the science or even the politics. It's about the chemistry of the human spirit that Brønsted embodied.
Chemistry of the human spirit. I like that.
Yeah. Resilience when facing loss, that boundless curiosity that challenged the status quo, unwavering integrity in his work and his life, and just profound courage when confronting both intellectual and moral opposition.
So the source encourages us to see Brønsted's life not just as history, but kind of like a mirror. It prompts reflection, What do we do when our own lives throw unforeseen loss or hardship at us? Do we let it define us? Or do we try to find a new path, a different angle, like he did after those early tragedies?
And it asks us to think. When we have an idea, maybe a different way of seeing things, that challenges the conventional wisdom around us, even among people we respect.
Yeah.
Do we have the persistence and the conviction to stand by it?
Yeah.
To defend it, to refine it, like Brønsted did with his acid-base theory.
And maybe most critically, when faced with those moments where silence might be easier, where speaking out against something fundamentally wrong carries a cost, do we find that moral courage to act, as Brønsted did when opposing Nazism?
The source doesn't just tell his story. It positions his life as a potential catalyst for us. It urges us to let his example spark reflection and maybe even action in our own challenges.
So when you next encounter a problem that just seems insurmountable, or a definition that feels incomplete, or maybe a situation that demands you take a stand, the source kind of invites you to pause and consider, what if Brønsted had given up?
It's a sobering thought. The world would have been significantly poorer, scientifically and perhaps morally, without his contributions.
Absolutely.
And by extension, the source reminds you that your own potential breakthroughs, your moments of courage, intellectual or moral, your voice.
Yeah.
These aren't insignificant.
No.
They are the very elements that can catalyze change in your own sphere and potentially ripple outwards into the world.
As the source quotes, echoing a sentiment you hear in many stories of perseverance, success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts.
Brønsted's life story, as presented in this source, it's just such a powerful argument for choosing courage. Again and again. It calls us to redefine what's possible, not just in grand scientific theories, but in how we live our lives, how we face our own challenges, how we interact with the world.
So will you be the next person to cast that stone into the pond, sending out ripples of change? Brunsted's incredible journey shows the answer isn't found in having some guarantee of success before you even start.
No, it's found in the willingness to simply try, to dream, to challenge, and maybe most importantly, to act, to step forward, to refine, persist, and speak out. No matter what the odds might seem like against you, that willingness, that courage to continue, well, that's the most potent catalyst of all.